Review session 7, imperfect competition. So that includes monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and monopoly. Remember, monopolistic competition is more like competition. Oligopoly is more like monopoly. So it is a sliding scale. And there is a surprise treasure hunt question in this review session. Okay, what we have here first, you have the titles for the graphs, but you actually need to draw the graphs. You'll notice that the 3 graphs that you are to draw in do not have labels on them, and that is because they look exactly the same. It's not the graphs that are different except for one thing, and that is where the ATC, the average total cost, is. So that's that U-shaped curve. You're going to see later that the difference has to do with profit. So draw these, draw them in order. First draw MC. Then draw, I would even label like MC1. Then draw demand, and then I'd label it D2. Then you draw MR under it, label it MR3, 1, 2, and 3 being the steps. MR is always a little steeper in slope than demand. Then fourth, mark your quantity. That is always MR equals MC. Do that. Go all the way up to your demand curve, shoot over, and mark your price. So that's not on the graph here on this slide. You need to mark where MR equals MC, draw your line down for quantity, and then take that point all the way up to the demand curve, and then make a horizontal line over to make your price curve. And you do that for all 3 market structures. I would go ahead and pause this while you draw that down. The only other thing you might want to do is draw the lines that look like this. So here I've marked price and quantity. Now I've placed the ATC curves, average total cost curves, last. Now the difference is the amount of profit. What you're going to notice in a moment when I go to the last slide for the graphs is your price, point to your first graph, point to your price. That's set. You're going to go all the way down to the ATC curve and stop. Draw a horizontal line to make that profit rectangle. That's your profit. The difference between the 3 graphs is going to be that the rectangle of profit is going to be larger as you go along. So monopolistic competition will have profit. Oligopoly, the rectangle will be a bit larger. Monopoly will be the largest. So the only difference in the graph in relationship to each other is the amount of profit that they can actually sustain. And here you can see that. So there you need to mark those down, the profit rectangles, and label them. I don't have them labeled here, but you want to label them. Always draw the other curves before the ATC curve, and this is why. They're going to ask you on the A/B test to show profit or loss, and you need to draw your ATC accordingly. If it's loss, then you need to make sure your ATC curve is above your price. So I would point to that when I talk about these things on the graph. Let's move on then to this next section here. Number 1, profit maximizing output. I talk too fast even on the review sessions. That rule again, MR equals MC. Marginal revenue equals marginal cost on the graph. The price then is your MR equals MC all the way up to the demand curve. One little trick I have here for you. If they say revenue maximizing, that's different. Usually they're always going to say profit maximizing, and that's just MR equals MC, or profit maximizing price, MR equals MC up to the demand curve. Revenue maximizing would be tricky if they said that, but that refers to the following graph. This graph here is the maximizing revenue graph. If you look at total revenue, that's your curve on the bottom. That upside down parabola is your total revenue curve. And you could put on the x-axis quantity, and I would sketch this to the side. And then on the y-axis is revenue. So total revenue goes up. Then after a while, the more you sell, your total revenue actually goes down. And the rate of change is your marginal revenue. Marginal means change. So we've graphed that above. It's like a roller coaster ride, or like a bungee ride at Kings Island. If you're shot up from like a cannon, trace your finger along the up part of the total revenue curve. That's you going up. And then for a moment, you're suspended in air. That's the max. There is no rate of change. Take your finger up that line to the MR curve and notice that MR crosses the x-axis. So MR is 0 when total revenue is at its height. And then you start to go down in the free fall, and that's where marginal revenue is less than 0 or negative. You do need to know the relationship between that graph. Okay, let's return to these graphs so you can just reference your graphs above or up here on the PowerPoint. The relationship between demand and MR. Demand is always greater than marginal revenue. I would write that down. D greater than MR. Efficiency. Remember, pure competition. Were they efficient? Yes, allocatively and productively. Here, in any three of these, so any imperfect competition, they are not efficient. So put a big no under number 4. Part A, allocative efficiency. I would write this down. That would be when what? You should know this. MB equals MC, comma. That's the same thing as saying demand equals supply, because our demand curve is our marginal benefit. It's the benefit the demanders get from consuming a good. And the MC serves as our supply. Then I would write in words. Society gets what it wants, right? Whatever's demanded is supplied. So that's really important. So that means that they were allocatively efficient. Look at the graph up here. Point to it. If they were allocatively efficient, they would be where supply equals demand. That would be MC equals D. And you can see that that is basically X marks the spot. It's the intersection of the MC and the demand curve. Point to it. I would go up to one of the graphs, maybe go to Monopoly or redraw it, and label that as allocatively efficient. Put a little dot there. Take your pen and go all the way down and write QS, socially optimal. That is the quantity that society would desire. Next, move on to productive efficiency. Write the definition. Least cost production. This is where your production costs the least. This is going to occur, put this down, occurs at ATC's minimum, right? Average total cost, the minimum total cost. Look at your graph and you'll notice that the minimum is always where ATC intersects MC, right? Because ATC always goes up once it intersects MC. And we clearly are before that point. So it is not allocative, or in this case, productively efficient. The last thing, relationship between price and marginal revenue. Well, look at it. Look at where you're at for profit maximization. You see where MR is. Put your finger on it. Put your finger on what our price is, which was MR equals MC up to the demand curve. And which one's greater? Clearly, the price is greater or higher up than marginal revenue. So you need to make sure that you know that. Let's talk about some of the differences between the graphs. One difference between the structures are barriers of entry. So what you need to write down is the more monopolistic it is, the more blocked entry is. That means firms cannot just say, oh, I want to make utilities or electricity. But with monopolistic competition, I can make wedding cakes. I can make bodybuilding supplements, okay, things like that. The other difference you want to write, sustained economics profits next there. In the long run, monopolies and oligopolies can sustain economic profit. Write that down. Monopolies and oligopolies can sustain economic profit. Now, oligopolies can do that because they're like monopolies, but there are just a few firms that have monopoly-like power. Monopolistic competition is destined for normal profit for the most part, like competition. And the reason is, write this down, low barriers of entry. That makes sense, right? If you, with your arms, make a supply and demand curve, so like an X, we know that when there's economic profit for pure competition, more firms enter. Move your supply curve arm to the right. You notice that price went down. That eventually is going to happen to a point where price is so low, people are not going to make profit, so more are going to exit. It's easy to enter and exit the market, so move your arm back to the left. Price goes up, move back even more. Price goes up. Oh, now we have economic profit. And that freedom of entry is what's going to cause you always to hover around normal profit, which is also breaking even. I would write that